This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Lag BaOmer is usually a time that we like to endeavor a little bit, delve a little bit into some of the areas of Torah that sometimes we don't have the opportunity always to go into, and it's an opportunity to sometimes take it a step beyond. I would like to share with you tonight not as much some of the hidden secrets of the Torah, but more understand the history and the development and the shalshelas hakabbalah of this branch of Torah. Of course, we know Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Moshe Rabbeinu received the entire Torah, Torah Shebachsav, Torah Shebal Peh, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Medrash, and the whole corpus of Torah Shebal Peh. But included with that is also the Torah Hasoid, the Chachmas Hachein, the hidden aspects of the Torah, which were given over from Rebbe to Talmud for many generations, and they were only given over to the Saridim, the princes, the select few. But we know the great revelation of the secrets of the Torah was revealed by the great Tana, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai, our tradition is that many of the secrets of the Torah he gave over on this great day, on Lag BaOmer, on the day of his yahrzeit, Yom HaDehilula. In fact, it's interesting, most people think Reb Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar HaKadosh. Actually, what percent of the Zohar did Reb Shimon write? 0. Reb Shimon did not write any of the Zohar HaKadosh. Reb Shimon dictated the Zohar HaKadosh to his Talmud, Rabbi Abba, and also later, Amoraim recorded what the body of the Zohar HaKadosh that we have today. Now, the analogy given by Reb Chaim Volozhner of what exactly is the Zohar HaKadosh, Reb Chaim Volozhner says like this: we have Mishnah, and we have Gemara, we have Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yushalmi. Well, the Mishnah of the Soidos HaTorah, the Mishnah of Kabbalah, is something called Safra D'Tzniusa. That's like the Mishnah of Kabbalah. And the Zohar HaKadosh is the Gemara, the Talmud, which elucidates the Safra D'Tzniusa. And there are many passages in the Zohar that begin Tana B'Tzniusa. It's a reference to the Safra D'Tzniusa. And when the Arizal came to the scene, what he was trying to do, and one of his main goals, was to demonstrate where exactly in the Safra D'Tzniusa the secrets of the Zohar emanate from. So I want to share with you a little bit of the history of the Arizal, and a little bit of the history of his primary disciple, Reb Chaim Vital, and then bring up a great mystery that is we would like to shed some light on, and some of it will remain shrouded in mystery. Okay, what I want to speak out today, a lot of what we're going to speak out is from a trilogy of Rav Yaakov Hillel. Rav Yaakov Hillel is one of the foremost Mekubalim today, one of the Mekubalim that the Gedolei Yisrael in the Ashkenazic world hold of very greatly. He wrote a trilogy called 3 volumes, Shivchei Arizal. Now, the Shivchei Arizal is an ancient work, but there are many texts and many nuschos and many versions of the Shivchei Hari. And Rav Yaakov Hillel sort of amended it and corrected what he considers the authentic version. That's 1 volume. Another volume is called Ha'ari Vigurav, the Ari and his students. The students of the Arizal are called the lion cubs. The Ari is the great lion, and his students are called the Gura Arya Yehuda. And then the 3rd volume is called Kisvuni L'Doros, which is the written tradition of Kabbalah. Just so you should know, the Arizal did not write down anything. Everything that Arizal wrote that we have today, not everything, most of what we have today from the Arizal was written down by Reb Chaim Vital. And the writings of Reb Chaim Vital laid dormant for 100 years. 100 years, the writings of Reb Chaim Vital lay dormant, some say in his grave, until it was dug up 100 years later. The Shlosh says there was a cherem, all the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael got together, and they put a cherem, let nobody spread the teachings of the Arizal to Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so let's see a little bit what exactly, where the Arizal came from, and how it developed that he taught his teachings to Reb Chaim Vital. In the Sefer Shivchei Hari, it writes like this. We know the Arizal was living in Mitzrayim, he was living in Egypt. He was a student of the Radvaz. The Radvaz was the Rav of Cairo, Rav David ben Zimra, a great halachist. He wrote more than 2,500 halachic responsa. And the Radvaz had two great Talmidim. The Radvaz also had a Talmud, Rabbi Ashkenazi, the author of the Shita Mekubetzes. And the Arizal is in Egypt. And one day, from the heavenly yeshiva, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, they call out to the Arizal and say, Reb Yitzchak, what are you doing in Chutz La'aretz? You need to go to Tzfas, to the upper Galilee. There you will be Zoicha to tremendous Gedula. You should know, they tell the Arizal, your days are numbered. And you will be Zoicha to Kvur in Eretz Yisrael. But there you will find your prize student, Reb Chaim Vital. He will be a prophet. He will continue your legacy. He has a great neshama. The neshama of Reb Chaim Vital was none other than a nitzutz of the great Tana, Rabbi Akiva. A Pillei Plum. The Reb Chaim Vital was a nitzutz of the neshama of Rabbi Akiva. Now, if you look in Reb Chaim Vital's Sefer Shar HaGalgulim, he writes that his neshama included many, many people. Primarily, though, he was considered a spark of Rabbi Akiva. And they tell the Arizal, do you know why you need to go to Tzfas to teach Reb Chaim Vital? Because in a previous Gilgul, Reb Chaim Vital was your Rebbe. He taught you everything. So you owe him big time. So you never know. You think, the Talmud thinks the Rebbe is doing him a favor. No. It's the Rebbe. The Rebbe owes. There are previous chayvos that the Rebbe has to pay back. The Arizal went to Tzfas to teach Reb Chaim Vital, to pay Reb Chaim Vital back for everything Reb Chaim Vital had taught him in some previous Gilgul. Okay. In the Shar HaGalgulim, Reb Chaim Vital writes that, if somebody would come to you and say, hey pal, you're neshama, you have the neshama of Rabbi Akiva, so you'd got to ask, Mehechite, how do you know? Well, who told you? So Reb Chaim Vital says that the Arizal gave me two proofs that I have the neshama of Rabbi Akiva. Proof number one that Arizal said was, he said, Reb Chaim, you ever realize every time you see somebody who's about to be killed, you get so nervous, you start sweating and you faint? You ever realize, do you know why that happens? The Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital, it's because you still remember the pain of your execution when you were Rabbi Akiva. And that is why every time you see somebody about to be executed, you get very nervous. You still feel it. You're still shaking in your bones from your previous existence. Happens to be, I have a question on that, because there's a famous comment in the Tashbetz. The Tashbetz writes that we have a Messiah, that when somebody dies al Kiddush Hashem, they don't feel any pain. So, not sure what the Arizal was saying. You still feel the pain of being Rabbi Akiva. We have a tradition that when somebody dies al Kiddush Hashem, the Tashbetz writes, they don't scream Oy, and they don't scream Avoy. And he brings a raya from the Messiah. It says, Hikuni Pitzauni, it says, Hikuni Bal Chalisi. And based on this Messiah, if someone is Messiah Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, it doesn't hurt. Okay, I'll let you think about that. And the other raya, that Reb Chaim Vital, the Rabbi Akiva, that the Arizal brought Reb Chaim Vital, he said, remember when you were a Bachar, Reb Chaim? You used to love to learn from the Sefer Perkei de Rebbe Lezer. You ever wonder why you were so attracted to the Sefer Perkei de Rebbe Lezer? You know why? Because you're the spark of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe was Rabbi Lezer Hagadol, and that's why you're so attracted to the Sefer Perkei de Rebbe Lezer. Okay, fine. So the Arizal makes his way to Tzfas, and he's sitting there in Tzfas, and there's no Reb Chaim Vital. So the Shivcha Ari brings down every night. Where's Reb Chaim Vital? He's in Damascus. He's in Damascus. And every night, the Arizal would go and remove the neshama of Reb Chaim Vital and teach him Torah. And he would say, Reb Chaim, why don't you come to learn from me? Why don't you come? Now, how he removed the neshama of Reb Chaim Vital is beyond the scope of tonight's talk. Maybe we'll discuss it on a different occasion. And Reb Chaim Vital would wake up in the morning, and he would tell his Talmidim, you wouldn't believe who came to me in a dream. It's the Arizal, and he's trying to teach me Kabbalah. And the Talmidim would laugh. Because Reb Chaim told them that he is greater than the Arizal in Kabbalah. And they would say, Rebbe, why would the Arizal come to teach you Kabbalah? They didn't believe it. Until one day, he's getting these recurring dreams, and he decided to check it out for himself. So he makes his way to Tzfas, and he decided to ask the Arizal a very difficult passage in the Zohar that Reb Chaim had already uncovered and explained. And he asked the Arizal, and the Arizal tells him shot, and Reb Chaim is floored. He never heard such secrets in his life. So he asked him again. He asked him another question. He asked him what's in another passage in the Zohar. And the Arizal told him, soidois, soidois, soidois. And the Shivchei Arizal says, the Reb Chaim stood before the Arizal, kishuol lefnei ha'ari, like a fox before a lion. In other words, completely humbled. And then Reb Chaim Vital musters up the courage. He says, Rabbeinu Ari, tell me pshat in the third passage in the Zohar. And the Arizal says, sorry, ad kan techum Shabbos. We can't go there. And Reb Chaim was devastated. The Arizal's not going to tell him what's going on over here. And he went home that night and he rolled in the dust and he covered himself in ashes and he cried and he comes back to the Arizal and he kisses his hands and he kisses his feet and he says, Rabbeinu, al ta'azveinu reiko milfanecha, please do not leave me empty-handed. And the Arizal says, look, Reb Chaim, I should kick you out. The fact that it took you 3 months, what were you doing in Damascus for 3 months when I had to come to you every night and remove your neshama and teach you? What was taking so long? But the fact that last night you wallowed in the dust and you languished in the ashes, that's a redeeming quality. And the Arizal started to teach Reb Chaim. And he would give Reb Chaim shir, and Reb Chaim would come home and his wife said, "No, what did you learn today?" And Reb Chaim would say, "Taka, a good question. I forgot." And he would come home the next day and his wife said, "What did you learn today?" I don't know, it was wonderful, it was really great. Sometimes you come back and say, "What did you learn?" I said, "It was amazing." "What did you learn?" It's not a regalachas, Reb Chaim could not remember anything. Until the Arizal said, "Look, Reb Chaim, we're going to have to take care of this." And the Arizal took him down to the Galilee Sea, and he gave him to drink from the Be'era Shel Miriam. And obviously that did the trick. Reb Chaim, from there on, his mind opened up. Kamayan HaMeskaber. Now, just as an aside, if you would want to know where the Be'er Shel Miriam is today, I know you're thinking, I've been to Arizal, I've been to the Galilee, I don't remember that. So let me just give you directions now to the Be'er Shel Miriam, no extra charge. In the Shar HaGilgulim, in number 4, he brings down, where is Be'er Shel Miriam? He writes, when you go from the sea to the hot springs, the road, the kolam ram with a lot of palm trees, besvas hayam, opposite the sea, mechuvan connected migdal echad, opposite the tower, beroy shahar, sham hu be'era shel Miriam. Okay, you got it? So basically, you take the straight path from the sea. Now you go to where the palm trees are, smack in the middle of the road, opposite the tower on the top of the mountain. There you'll find it. So they come to the Arizal, they say, Ari, Rabbeinu Ari, you're teaching us so much. Everything we know is from you. Why don't you write down your chidushim so that the future generations could learn from it? And the Arizal said, let me tell you something. Every time I open my mouth, there's like this torrent of chachma that comes down to me min hashamayim that it could destroy you. I don't even know how to contain it. It's like a baby who suckles from his mother. If the opening is too big, the baby could choke. And I'm fighting to try to restrain myself just to be able to give to you from a small little opening. And therefore I can't write it down. Here's my advice. Each one of you, now this is very difficult to understand. Each one of you should write down what you learned from me, but Omnam lo yinitain reshus lichtov zulas Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital is the only one who's authorized to write down what I'm teaching you. Shehu yodea yet leir l'sevdait. He's the only one who really gets it. And then the Arizal says, you know why? Because he's a nitzutz of the great Tana, Rabbi Akiva. And nevertheless, the Arizal said, but everyone should write down. So it's hard to understand what he meant. First he tells them everyone should write down, but only Reb Chaim Vital is allowed to. And then he tells them again, everyone should write down. Apparently everyone was allowed to keep some kind of private notes, but Reb Chaim Vital is the only one who's allowed to write it down, l'doros. Now this is not just the Arizal reporting and writing, and those writing about the Arizal, that he told Reb Chaim Vital that he's the only one authorized to write down the secrets of the Torah. But in fact, Reb Chaim Vital, in his introduction to Reb Chaim Vital's most prominent work is probably the Eitz Chaim, and it's printed, I think, in all the volumes of Eitz Chaim, a Hakdama that Reb Chaim Vital wrote to other Sfarim, and Reb Chaim Vital writes at the end of this Hakdama, if you look at number 6, says Reb Chaim Vital, Da, very important, Kiktsas mechavarenu kasam sam. You should know many of our holy associates wrote books. Masha shamu mimayri, what we heard from the Arizal. Bekulam kasvu dvarim b'toisefes v'gron b'chinas haksuvim. They all either added or they all detracted. Nobody hit the nail on the head. And because nobody hit the nail on the head, they all left hinichu makom lekama kushois. If you read a book from the Torah of Arizal, written from a different student other than me, you're going to be left with a lot of questions, says Chaim Vital. Do not rely on any book that comes from the Torah of Arizal, except for my books. You need to distance yourself from them. So here we have the Arizal telling Reb Chaim Vital, you're the only one authorized to write down my Torah. Reb Chaim Vital himself is being made, he's testifying that nobody really understood the Kabbalah of Arizal. If you're going to read any of the books of the Talmud of Arizal, you're going to be lacking. You're not going to understand. You're going to have questions. They either added or they took away. Stay away from those books. By the way, in the Chida wrote his probably most well-known work, the Shem Agdoilim, where the Chida wrote and collected the names of all the Gedolei Yisrael who were in the generations before him, and he wrote and collected all of the Svarim that were written before his time. And in his entry on Reb Chaim Vital, he writes, by the way, Reb Chaim Vital also learned Pshat. Who is Reb Chaim Vital's Rebbe in Pshat? The Alshech HaKadosh. And when the Alshech HaKadosh got wind that his Talmud was learning Kabbalah from the Arizal, the Alshech HaKadosh says, I'm also in. And the Alshech went to learn from the Ari, and the Ari did not allow the Alshech to come. The story goes that the Alshech kept on falling asleep. The Arizal says, take that as a sign that stick to the Perish al HaTorah. Okay. The Chida writes a number of very interesting things about Reb Chaim Vital. One of them is this idea that we're mentioning. He writes, if you turn over the page on the 5th line, on the 6th line, Hinei Rabbeinu Ari Tziva Sheshum Echad Mitalmidav La Yichtov Zulas Reb Chaim Vital. The Arizal warned that no student may write down the Chidushim that they learned from him other than Reb Chaim Vital. So here we have the Shivchei Ari writes very clearly that the Arizal didn't want anyone except Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital writes, stay away from any other book. The Chida writes, it's well known that the Arizal said this. By the way, just another brief aside, very interesting. You would imagine, if you ever looked at the Kisvei Arizal, you have many, many volumes, right? You have Tamei HaMitzvos, you have Shah HaGogulim, Shara HaMitzvos, Aramei Shekel, and so on and so forth. You would think then Reb Chaim Vital learned so much from the Arizal. I mean, he must have sat and learned by him for years, for decades, for his whole lifetime. Amazingly, the Arizal only spent a year and 10 months in Tzfas, and then he passed away. The whole career of the Arizal in Tzfas was 1 year and 10 months. It is interesting how historical machlokas, whether Reb Chaim Vital was older than the Arizal. Many historians say he was older. Chida disagrees vehemently. Chida proves that Reb Chaim Vital was 10 years younger than the Arizal. He writes like this. Here's the proof. He says, when Reb Chaim Vital came to the Arizal, it was in the year Shin Lamed Aleph. What's Shin Lamed Aleph? The year Shin... Excuse me. Reb Chaim Vital was born in the year Shin Gimel. Shin Gimel is what? 1543. Okay, so Reb Chaim Vital was born in the year 1543. He comes to Tzfas to learn from the Arizal, Shin Lamed Aleph. Shin Lamed Aleph is 1571. That would make Reb Chaim Vital 28 years old when he comes to Tzfas. The Arizal died in the year Shin Lamed Beis. The next year, that's 1572. The Arizal was how old when he died? Arizal was 38 years old. So that means if the Arizal was 38, Reb Chaim Vital was 28, 29 years old when he was learning from the Arizal. Okay, Rabbi Sai, so those are a number of interesting stories, anecdotes, and the question is, why am I telling you stories? This is not story time, and I'm not a storyteller. Why are we learning about the development of Reb Chaim Vital and the Arizal? What's this got to do with anything? Well, this is very important. Because there is a very big problem in the world of Kabbalah, And that is, there is a branch of Kabbalah that, very dramatic, that comes from the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon's branch of Kabbalah, he taught primarily to his disciple, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who was one of the Kedoshei Elyon. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner gave it over to his student, the Nachlas David, Reb David Tevel. And he gave it over to Reb Nachman Mendel Mishkolov and Reb Yisrael Mishkolov. And then to the Pesh Lishi, the third mouth from the Vilna Gaon, Reb Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. And lo and behold, if you read some of the Chidushim of the Vilna Gaon on the Safra D'Tzniusa, on the Sefer HaYetzirah, and if you read some of the comments of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, you see certain Kabbalistic ideas that have absolutely no makar in any of the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. For example, what? Well, I am not a great expert, but just very basically, there are, how many worlds are there? How many realms are there? Very basically, there's something even the Chafetz Chaim talks about in the Sefer Avas Chesed. There are 4 worlds. There is Olam HaAsiyah, that's where we are now, we hope, right? Hello, right? That's where we're over here in the Olam HaAsiyah, right? And in the world above the Olam HaAsiyah is called the Olam HaYetzirah, which I believe the Chafetz Chaim says are the Oifanim B'chayos HaKodesh. And above that you have something called Olam HaBriya, which perhaps that is where the Kisei HaKavod is, in the Olam HaBriya. And above that is what is thought by many to be what? What did you say? Atzilus. Atzilus, the Olam HaAtzilus. What does Atzilus mean? Hewn out. In other words, God's glory is hewn out there. It's carved out to there. It doesn't mean God himself is there. God's Atzmius is his inherent being. We're not commenting now where it is, but the highest realm that's discussed in the writings of Chaim Vital is the Olam HaAtzilus. And these 4 worlds are alluded to in the word Abiyah. Abiyah. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah. Very nice. Reb Chaim Vital does not tell us what's beyond that. Why would he? Is there anything beyond that? It would never dawn on anybody that there is. And yet if you read the Nefesh HaChaim and the Shar Daled, every yeshiva in the world learns Nefesh HaChaim. And if you don't learn the first 3 Sharim, they all learn Shar Daled. Shar Daled talks about the greatness of Torah. Lo and behold, the Nefesh HaChaim drops an atom bomb in the Shar Daled Perek Yud. The Nefesh HaChaim drops this idea. He says, V'gam ki sharsha ha'elyon shel ha'Torah ha'kdosha hu be'elyon she'b'ha'olamos. The source of the pinnacle of the Torah is in the highest worlds, Hanikram Oilamos Ha'in Soif, which is called the world of no end. Soid Hamalbush Hanelam, the secret of the hidden cloak. Hanizgar, which is mentioned, Besisrei Pliois Chachma, in the secrets of the wonders of wisdom, Mitairas Arizal. Which book is that? Don't say that in my books. You look through the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, none of them are Sisrei Pliyas Chachma. What's Reb Chaim Volozhiner talking about? All of a sudden, he's going beyond the Kabbalah of Reb Chaim Vital, and then he reiterates. Look at the next paragraph. V'lachein ha'Torah ha'Kedosha shesharsho ha'elyon ha'nelam hu lamala mala gamei atzilus. The root of the Torah is higher, not only than Asiyah, Yitzirah, Bria, Atzilus. It's higher than Atzilus. Where is it? The root of the Torah is God himself, like it says, that's the source of all the worlds, like the pasuk says about the Torah. It says that Hashem used the Torah to create the worlds. If you want to know where all the 4 worlds came from, it came from the Torah. That means the Torah is above Atzilus. Where did Reb Chaim Volozhiner get it from? I mean, obviously he got it from the Vilna Gaon, but which books of the Arizal did he get this from? These are not in any of the books of Chaim Vital. Did the Vilna Gaon not concern himself with the warning and the admonition of the Arizal? I mean, the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital, you're the only one authorized to record my teachings. Was there some kind of other tradition from the Arizal that we don't know about? That Reb Chaim Vital didn't know about? Well, what's going on? Where did Reb Chaim Volozhiner get it from? And in fact, I was discussing this with Ari this week. The Baal HaLeshem writes that primarily his Kabbalistic teachings are based on the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. Except, says the Baal HaLeshem, the Baal HaLeshem is like the continuum of the line of Kabbalah from the Goin. So you have the Goin, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, Reb Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, Reb David Tevel, Reb Menachem and the Mishkolov, to the Baal HaLeshem of Shlomo Yashiv. And he says, if you want to know my contribution, I'm writing on the Kisvei of Reb Chaim Vital. But you can't ignore that there is another body of wisdom that Reb Chaim Vital doesn't even discuss, and that is above the four worlds, above Yitzira, Asira, Bria, and Atzilos. And I can't help myself but talk a little bit about that as well. And he says like this, where do I get this from? Is that me? Where does he get this from? Says the Baal HaLeshem, if you look through the writings of the Vilna Gaon, and you look through the Vilna Gaon's comments to the Sefer Tzniusa, and the Vilna Gaon's comments to Sefer Yetzirah, and you look in the passage of the Nefesh Chaim that we quoted, they are talking about things that Reb Chaim Vital never discussed. Where'd they get it from? Says the Baal HaLeshem, it's unclear exactly where they got it from, but one thing we know, this body of information, and we'll call it the body of information that exists above and beyond the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, are smuchim umuskamim mi beis midrashay shel hagra. The Gra has given his haskama to. That's what the Baal HaLeshem writes. If you look at number 9, at the end of the first paragraph, he writes, bottom line is, this body of information is confirmed, authorized, notarized by the Beis Medrash of the Vilna Gaon. Says Rav Shlomo Elyashiv, do you know where this information comes from? This information only comes from one man. There's only one man who discusses Kabbalah above the realms of Reb Chaim Vital, and that is the Ramah Mipano. The Ramah Mipano, Reb Menachem Azariah Mipano, is the only person who discusses it. And you know where he got it from? So I want to introduce you to an individual who's not so well known, and I'm not sure if he's going to become better known after today's shir. Ramah Mipano got this body of information from an individual named Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was one of the students of the Arizal. And he is the one who brought down to this world, from the Arizal, this information of what's doing beyond Atzilos. Okay, we're just saying the words. We're just getting a taste a little bit. He got it from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Therefore, says the Baal HaLeshem, even though it's not authorized by Reb Chaim Vital. So I'm telling you, almost everything I wrote is based on Reb Chaim Vital. But I could not ignore this body of information, which is muskam v'nismach mehagoin, mi beis medrasha shel hagoin, and mi beis medrasha shel Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and it comes from the Ramah Mipano, who learned it from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, and therefore I dedicate one little sefer to this body of information. It's called, what we have over here, the Shar HaPoineh Kadem. And this is the introduction to the Shar HaPoineh Kadem.
What year was the Ramah Mipano?
What year was the Ramah Mipano? The Ramah Mipano was nifter in the year 1620. Now that means, if the Arizal passed away in 1572, the Ramah was like the grand Talmud of the Arizal, because we're learning the Ramah learned from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Now we got to get some more information on this. Who is this Rabbi Yisrael Saruk? There's a big problem with this. What's the problem? Who is the man? I never heard of him. I mean, I heard of Reb Chaim Vital, I heard of the Alshech, I heard of Rabbi Yosef Karai, I heard of Moshe Cordovero, I heard of Rabbi Elazar Askiri, I heard of all the holy associates in Tzvas. Who's Rabbi Yisrael Saruk? He ain't mentioned anywhere. So I remembered that, over the years, when you want to talk about Gilgulim, there are always two places to go. You could go to the Shar HaGilgulim of the Arizal, or you could go to the Shar HaGilgulei Neshamas, the Ramah Mipano. And they don't always agree with each other. In the Shar Blat, in the Pesach Shar of the Ramah Mipano, it says that Reb Menachem Azariah, the Ramah Mipano, gained this knowledge from Reb Yisrael Saruk. The Chida writes in his entry to Ramah Mipano, who is the Rebbe of the Ramah Mipano? Reb Yisrael Saruk. Lo and behold, if you look at number 13, the Ramah Mipano wrote a sefer, Maimer Eim Kol Chai, And there's one chidush in the entire corpus of writing of Ramami Pano where he teaches a secret, and he says, you know where I got it from? I want you to look at number 13. He says, Kach hi Kabbalas Hari mi Pimoiri Rabbi Yisrael Neiro Yoyer Echad mi Gedoyle Talmidah. One time in all the writings of Ramami Pano, he sort of lets the guard down. He says, you know who taught this to me? I learned this from Rabbi Yisrael. Now, which Rabbi Yisrael doesn't even say, doesn't even give you his last name. You would have to assume it's Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. And I, shezikani leharbe gufei Torah. He taught me a lot of Torah. Be'ezus Hashem, I want to learn with you tonight the one secret that the Ramami Pano writes. He heard from his Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. I'm going to say it now. It's not going to make any sense. We'll end off the shir by explaining it. He's going on a Gemara in Masechta Brachos and Daf Tes Vav Amud. Look at number 29. The Gemara says like this: Rabbi Avadia taught. It says about Shema v'limadatem, and you should teach it sheyehei limudach tam, that your learning should be complete. Which means when you say Shema, you need to interrupt between the words. Sheyitain revach ben hadvekim. You need to put spaces in between words that sound similar to each other. Okay, you have to pause. V'limadatem oisam es b'neichem ledaber bam. Sometimes people want to know, hey, I finished Shema already. What's taking him so long? What's he doing? Is he saying like a different version of Shema? No, you're saying it 3 times, 4 times. You're supposed to pause between the words. Then comes Rava. Ani Rava basrei kegoin al levavecha. Al levavchem, b'chol levavcha, b'chol levavchem, esev besadcha, va'avadetem mehera, hakonof, psil, eschem eretz. Rava gives 8 examples of where you need to pause between the words. And then the Gemara concludes, anybody, Amar Rab Chama Rabbi Chanina, kol hakori kriya Shema, u'madakdek ba'oisi oisea, anyone who reads Shema and is careful in the letters, mitzanin and loy gehenom, they will cool off Gehenim for you. So you say, I'm trying to avoid it in the first place. Okay, but just in case, it's a good idea. And the big kash on this Gemara is, Rava gave 8 examples. B'chol levavcha, al levavchem. And my question on Rava is, you're kidding me, Rava. I mean, I needed the great Amoira Rava to list the places in Shema where you have 2 letters together. I mean, Kol Bar Beira, any little kid could look at the Shema and know where you need to interrupt, where you need to pause. What exactly is the big chiddush of Rava? So the Ramami Pano writes that the secret of this Gemara he learned from his Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, and that is there are 4 lamids, 2 mems, 1 beis, 1 pei. They equal 60. B'chushban ze'er dechanoich. That's what Rabbi Yisrael Saruk taught me. The 8 lamids and the 4 mems and the 2 bezes and they equal, and the 2 pays equal 60. First of all, they don't equal 60. What in the world is cheshboin ze'er dechanoich, and what in the world is he talking about? Hopefully we'll be able to explain that. By the way, also, very important, and this we're going to give us another clue. The Rabbi Yisrael Saruk had another Talmud. One of the great works on Shas, one of the Kadmonim on Shas, is the Be'er Sheva, Rabbi Sacher Ber Eilenberg, one of the Kadmonim on Shas. He writes in his Hakdama that his Rebbe in Kabbalah was none other than Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Look at number 15. And Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was a Talmud of the Arizal. And you know how I learned all this information? From the Chacham Hashalem Moreno Rab Ezra Mipano, which is a major problem. Because the Be'er Sheva writes he heard it from Rab Ezra Mipano from the city of Mantova. Now Mantova is a city in Italy, but who's Rab Ezra Mipano? What does it mean he learned it from Rab Ezra Mipano? I know Ramah Mipano, Rab Menachem Mipano, Rab Menachem Azariah. Who's Rab Ezra Mipano? So Rabbi Sai, what we need to address is a very pressing question in understanding the development of Kabbalah, and that is 2 major questions. The Vilna Gaon himself was well aware of the Azhara of the Arizal to Reb Chaim Vital. Arizal to Reb Chaim Vital, don't you dare let anybody else write my teachings. The Reb Chaim Vital writes, any book not written by me, stay away from. The Chidar writes that the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital he's the only one authorized. And here, the Gaon and his Talmud Chaim Elazar and his Talmidei Ramami Pano. They're all going around promulgating this brand of Kabbalah, which has no basis at all in the writings of Rav Chaim Vital. They apparently got it according to the Baal Haleshem, Rav Shlomo Yasha. Where'd they get it from? Ramami Pano, who got it from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk! He's not an authorized member of the chain of Kabbalah. Here, the Arizal Torah, Chaim Vital, you're the only one. Who's Rabbi Yisrael Saruk? How could the Vilna Gaon ignore the warning, the Azhara of the Arizal? And even more startling, and this is a question of Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel raises this in his Sefer Ari V'Gurav, that many historians are troubled by the fact that in the Shar HaGogul, Rav Chaim Vital lists all the students of the Arizal, and conspicuously absent from the list, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, he's not even on the list. So it's Pilei Plaim that the Vilna Gaon would completely disregard, seemingly, the great Ashara of the Arizal, and learn Kabbalah and promulgate Kabbalah from someone he's not even on the list. He's not even on the list of the who's who of the Talmidim of the Arizal. Surprisingly, the only one who asked this question point blank is Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner, Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin, who was a Talmud of Slabodka and also a Talmud of great Mekubalim, most notably Rav Kook. People don't know that. Actually, Rav Hutner said the first store of his, level of his building was from Slabodka. The second story of his building was from Rav Kook. Rav Hutner is bothered by this question. Rav Hutner was asked to write a haskama to a sefer Alfasi Zuta. Now, who's the Alfasi? The Alfasi was the Rif. The Ramami Pano, aside from being a great Kabbalist, was also a great halachist. He wrote Shal Sechuvas Ramami Pano. He also wrote Alfasi Zuta. He wrote a Kitzur of the Rif. And Rav Hutner was asked, the Kitzur was republished, and Rav Hutner was asked to write a haskama. He says, I'm going to write a haskama for the Ramami Pano. Ramami Pano is the Kadmoin. But says Rav Hutner, what I want to do is put in perspective what people don't realize, the role of the Ramami Pano in the panorama, in the chain of Klal Yisrael. In other words, probably if you've been coming to the Shurim, you've probably now heard the name Ramami Pano, but exactly what is his rank and file? What was his role in the Messiah of Klal Yisrael? Says Rav Hutner, let's put it in the right perspective. And he asked this question point blank. There's no question the Vilna Gaon was well aware of the Azhara of the Arizal, that the only person authorized to write the teachings of the Ari was Rav Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital himself writes it, the Chida writes it. And yet at the same time, the Gra and the Talmidei HaGra are promulgating a brand of Kabbalah which is beyond the scope of the writings of Rav Chaim Vital. Says Rav Hutner, the only one who answers this question is Rav Tzadok HaKohen. Tzadok HaKohen, he's addressing a different phenomenon, and that's the phenomenon is, no matter how many cherems there are throughout history about learning Kabbalah, nobody ever accepted them. The Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, the Reb Chaim Vital said, I'm writing Kabbalah, nobody take it, and they stole it. Nobody listened to him. And no matter how much people, and that's the phenomenon that the Reb Tzadok HaKohen is discussing. But Toch Kedei Devarav, he says a very interesting thing. Please take a look at number 21 in the Sefer Kuntris Sefer HaZachronos. This is one of Rav Tzadok HaKohen's writings, and he writes in the third paragraph over here, V'gam harav Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Sometimes he refers to as Saruk, it's the same thing. Shahaya kafi hanira hagadol shabatalmidei hari zulas Rav Chaim Vital. Here you have somebody probably many never even heard of. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen is saying, of all the Talmidei Hari, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was the greatest besides Rav Chaim Vital. Halach teikav achar b'tiras hari le'Italia. When the Arizal passed away, Rabbi Chaim Vital stuck in Svas, and everybody else stayed in Svas. And Rabbi Yisrael Saruk went to Italy. We'll see, Italy wasn't necessarily his first stop. And it might not have been his second stop either. and we don't even know why he went. We'll have to discuss that. He went to Italy. And in Italy, he was mefarseim all of the teachings of the Ari, and his student, the Rama Mipano, was mefarseim even more. You know why? Because many of the ideas, says the Tzaddik HaKohen, the concept of what exists above Atzilus is not found anywhere in the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, even though, by the way, the Baal HaLeshem says Reb Chaim Vital alludes to it. He says like this. He says two things. And one of them Rav Hutner takes very seriously, and that is, Shekiblam Rabbi Saruk Terem Ba Reb Chaim Vital Fnei Hari. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk had the audience of the Arizal well before Reb Chaim Vital came. In other words, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was a student of the Ari before Reb Chaim Vital. Well, Reb Chaim Vital is still in Damascus. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk is learning Kabbalah from the Arizal. Or he had a different schedule than Reb Chaim Vital. Those are the two possibilities. Either he made it there before Reb Chaim Vital, or they had a different schedule. When Reb Chaim Vital had the day shift, and Rabbi Yisrael Saruk had the night shift. We don't know exactly. And when Rabbi Yisrael Saruk went to Italy, and he composed all his works, Reb Chaim Vital did not have any knowledge of all the writings of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk and the Rama Mipano. That's what Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen says. Says Rav Hutner, the first possibility of Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen is correct. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk learned from the Arizal before Reb Chaim Vital got there. So you'll say, okay, but you would think that Reb Chaim Vital would have tapped him on the shoulder and said, Rabbi Yisrael, what did you learn from the Arizal? What did the Arizal tell you? We'll have to deal with that. Maybe he never asked that question, or maybe for whatever reason, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was privy to information Reb Chaim Vital seemed not to have been. And therefore, says Rav Hutner, a big chiddush, the warning of the Arizal to Reb Chaim Vital that you're the only one authorized to write down my teachings, that's only from you and on. But it did not apply to people who learned from the Arizal before Reb Chaim Vital. In other words, it seems like Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was grandfathered in before the Arizal gave his strict admonition that nobody else could write down his teachings. In fact, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel writes that when Reb Chaim Vital gathered and amassed all the various writings of all the various Talmidim, of course he would have included the writings of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. The only thing is, they weren't there. They were in Italy. They were not hanging around in Eretz Yisrael. And amazingly, an amazing historic phenomenon that the Baal HaLeshem points out is that, strangely enough, everything that Reb Chaim Vital learned from the Ari, for 100 years nobody knew about it. It lay dormant under the earth. The Reb Chaim Vital said the world is not ready for it. Meanwhile, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk books town, he goes to Italy, and for 100 years, all of Europe knows and learns the Kabbalah of Arizal the way Rabbi Yisrael Saruk learned the Kabbalah of Arizal. So for 100 years, the higher realms of Kabbalah were rampant in Europe, while the lower realms were hidden in Eretz Yisrael. And when the Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael began to learn the Svarim of Chaim Vital, which, by the way, were much more precise than any other Svarim, and they then had access to the Svarim of Yisrael Saruk, they put a cherem on anybody learning Kabbalah outside of Eretz Yisrael. One of the reasons was they felt that all of the books outside of Eretz Yisrael were not uncorrupted. They felt they were all of corrupt text. So unusual hashgacha that Rabbi Yisrael Saruk learns from the Arizal what's beyond anything Reb Chaim Vital. He takes it, he goes off to Italy, he teaches it to the whole Europe. Europe has it for 100 years, and all the realms of Reb Chaim Vital in Eretz Yisrael, nobody's learning for 100 years. That's the Messiah of the Kabbalah. Now, just to add one very brief thing. If back to the Hakdama of the Be'er Sheva writes that he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, who is a student of the Arizal, and where did he learn the Kabbalah of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk from? Rabbi Ezra Mipano. Now you should know, Rabbi Ezra Mipano was a great Kabbalist in Italy in the times of the Rama Mipano. He was a different individual. And Rav Hutner writes, there's a Torah Sefer in the Be'er Sheva. And people think that the Be'er Sheva learned Kabbalah from Rabbi Ezra Mipano. It's not true. It's all the Kabbalah of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk came through Rama Mipano. Who's Rabbi Ezra Mipano? Rabbi Ezra Mipano brought the Kabbalah of the Ramak to Italy. The Ramak was Rav Moshe Cordovero. Rav Moshe Cordovero's Kabbalah, the way the Vilna Gaon calls it, where philosophy ends, the Kabbalah begins, and namely the Kabbalah of the Ramak. Where the Kabbalah of the Ramak ends, the Kabbalah of the Arizal begins. At first, the Rama Mipano learned only the Kabbalah of the Ramak. Who brought the Kabbalah of the Ramak to Italy? Rabbi Ezra Mipano. But then when Rabbi Menachem Azariah started to learn Kabbalah of the Arizal from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, he put aside the Kabbalah of the Ramak and he focused only on the Kabbalah of the Arizal. How he got the Kabbalah of the Ramak, it's a wondrous story. We'll say that for another time. I want to talk just very briefly.
He's the one that's buried next to Rabbi Akiva?
No, that's Ramchal. The Ramak happens to be buried right near the Arizal.
Right.
Yeah? Who's Rabbi Yisrael Sarug? Who is he? Never heard of him. Where is he mentioned? Does anybody quote him? Apparently the Rama Mipano considered him his Rebbe in Kabbalah. So the first place you look if you want to know about a Gadol is in the Chida. Chida writes in his entry to Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, Ayin Reb Shlomo Luria. Look in my biography on the Marshal. Marshal? I mean, you couldn't get more... It's different. The Marshal is one of the great Achroinim, one of the great rationalist Achroinim. What's he got to do? And then he says, look at Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi, ki ulai zehu. Maybe Rabbi Yisrael Saruk is Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi. Say, who's Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi? So I looked in the Chidah, Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi, we know nothing about him. So obviously this is a character, not a character, a figure, shrouded in great mystery. He left Tzfas, either, the Rebbe Chaim says, right after that Arizal died, and he spread Kabbalah everywhere. We're going to see he went to Amsterdam. He was the Rebbe of Rabbi Avram Ariria. Right, you're hearing names, of he is the Rebbe of the author of the Sefer Matzrif LaChochma. Look in the biography of the Marshal. Comes the Chidah. We know the Marshal, the Yamshel Shlomo, who's many consider the greatest of all the Achroinim. Says the Chidah, V'shamati shelomad chachmas ha'emes and Rabbi Yisrael Sarug. That the Marshal learned Kabbalah with Rabbi Yisrael Sarug? What in the world was Rabbi Yisrael Sarug doing in Krakow? How did he get to Krakow? I know he's in Svas. I know he's in Italy. How did he get to Krakow? Well, he took one of these, world tours. He doesn't say. I found an amazing thing about this. We're almost there. One place in the Magen Avram, he quotes Rabbi Yisrael Sarug. Now you should know the Magen Avram is the most concise of all the Noisei Kelim and Shulchan Aruch. Magen Avram was an ani ve'evyon. He could not even afford to buy paper. The commentary of Magen Avram was written on the walls of his house. Magen Avram writes, you should fast on Erev Rosh Chodesh, or many fast on Erev Rosh Chodesh. And what if Rosh Chodesh comes out on Shabbos? You should fast on Friday. And I heard that Rabbi Yisrael Saruk had a very unusual custom. Says now the Magen Avram, the last thing he's going to do is write stories. When you're short on paper, the last thing you do is write Maisalach. I heard that Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, he fasted on the day of the Moilad, but once the Moilad came, he stopped fasting. This is the only allusion and mention of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug in the Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. So what do we know about him? He was the Rebbe of the Rama Mipano. He's the Rebbe of the Be'er Sheva. He's the one who is the source of the Kabbalah of the Gra and the Chaim and the Leshem of what exists beyond Atzilus. We don't even know who he is. Is he Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi? Is he not? He taught the Marshal in Krakow. What's he doing in Krakow? Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, one of the great Goyim of Tanakh Sam Sofer, he brings down a tradition that Be'avas Hashem L'Klal Yisrael, this is in number 28, it's a sefer that just came out, I think this week, from Rabbi Chil Michal Stern. He wrote a biographical information on a lot of the Gedolim, but he has a section on the Mekubalim. Be'avas Hashem Es Amoy, and the fact that Hashem wanted the Klal Yisrael and the Golos to learn Kabbalah, he sent a great gur, a great lion cub named Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, who was onus al pi dibur, to travel from place to place and spread Kabbalah. So Rabbi Ephraim Zal Margolis writes about Arizal Saruk, he was Onos al pi hadibur. What does that mean? So there's a tradition that when the Arizal, now this is different than Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, but this might explain things a little bit clearer. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen said that the Rabbi Yisrael Saruk left Tzfas after the Arizal died, which would make it hard to understand. You would think Rabbi Chaim Vital then would have had a discussion with Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Do you know anything I don't know? You would think they would have conferred on matters. This is a different tradition. Then when the Arizal was teaching his Talmidim, he got wind of the fact that the Marshal in Krakow wanted to put Kabbalah in Cherem. And Arizal was very concerned with this plan of the Marshal. First of all, Arizal was related to the Marshal. They have the same last name, Luria. In fact, that's why Sephardim claim that the Arizal was Ashkenazi. And there's a reason why they claim that, and they prove it from the fact he had the name Luria. Luria is an Ashkenazic name. And the Arizal then told his prime student, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, Rabbi Yisrael, you know what's going on in Krakow? The Marshal, my cousin, he's going to put an end to this whole thing. So he gave him a few shemos, and he laser beamed to Krakow. And Rabbi Yisrael Saruk knocked on the Marshal's door. And maybe that's the tradition that Chida is referring to when he says that I heard that Rabbi Yisrael Saruk taught the Marshal Kabbalah. And when the Marshal heard the Kabbalah of Arizal, he laid off. So says this legend. But that would explain, that would come out according to this, he didn't leave after the Arizal died like Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen. He was sent by the Arizal, maybe even before the Rabbi Chaim Vital came there. Maybe Rabbi Chaim Vital never even met him. So that might explain. Bottom line is, throughout the generations, many Mikubalim had problems with this branch of knowledge, most notably Rav Meir Paparish and others, including the Shlach Kadosh. But as Rabbi Yaakov Hillel says, in every generation there are these select few who could make heads or tails over these things, and leave it to your imagination who these people are. But Rabbi said, let's end off with the one secret that the Rama Mipano records he learned from his Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. And we say it seemed completely inexplicable. He's bothered by the Gemara Masechta Brachas, and that Tezvav Amabez, the Gemara says, V'limadet temaisam, v'limadet tam, that your learning needs to be complete. In other words, you need to make spaces between the Devekim, and Rava gave 8 examples. Al levavecha, al levavchem, b'chol levavecha, b'chol levavchem, Esev besadcha, va'avadetem mehera, hakonaf psil, escha me'eretz, and says the Rama Mipano, based on the cheshbon of Chushbon de Zeira de Chanoich, it adds up to 60, and we'll call it a day. And God will turn on the air conditioner in Gehenim for you. Alright, we'll take the AC, but exactly how do we get there? Rama Mipano doesn't explain. If you look 3 chapters later, in the same Sefer Eim Kol Chai Parak Chaf, look at number 30. The Rama Mipano adds some further information. He writes, "Va'asad lahoysav chalaloi kulei yomer kod alei chali began eden v'schos hanoisin revach ben adveikim shal kriya shema shem shishim kidol el v'utam amroi eden echad mishishim begehenim." Doesn't help us that much, but Baruch Hashem, there's a commentary in the Rama Mipano who says like this. Actually, if you look in the Rishonim, almost all the words in the Shema need to be separated. So why is Rava only picking those 8? Even the Art Scroll, right? So how could Rava argue on the Art Scroll Siddur, right? The Art Scroll says so many, and Rava only says 8. So it must be a big side that Rava is teaching, right? And if you use Chushban de Zeiri de Chanoich, what is that? It's a nice way of saying Mispar Katan. Basically, what Rava is saying is there are 8 Lamids, there are 4 Mems, there are 2 Pays, and there are 2 Bezes. There are 8 Lamids, 2 Pays, 2 Bezes, and 2 Mems. Well, Lamed is 30, but using Mispar Katan, 8 times 3 is 24. And Pei is 80, but Mispar Katan is 8, 2 times 8 is 16. So we're up to 40. And then There are 2 bases. 2 times 2 is 4. We're up to 44. And then there are 4 mems. Mem b'mispar katan is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 60. What Rav is saying is, somehow the kayach of being mafsik between the spaces in Shema is 60. It adds up to 60. The Gemara says in Masechta Tainis that what's bigger, Gan Eden or Gehenim? Obviously, Gehenim is bigger. It just everything is based on necessity, Rabbi say, right? So, it actually, the Gemara says that Gehenim is 60 times the size of Gan Eden. So, if somehow we could minimize Gehenim 1/60th, we're making Gehenim into Gan Eden. Mamela says, Ramami Pano, I heard from my Rabbi Saruk, that in these 8 Devekim, which add up, the Mispar Katan, to 60. If you're able to separate properly, then you're taking Shema and you're creating a 60th. And you could take Gehenim and shrink it a 60th, and then when you turn on the air conditioner in Gehenim, you're in Gan Eden. You see from here the great importance of air conditioning, and you also see the great importance of being mafsik properly in Kriya Shema. This is the secret that Ramami Pano records, that his Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, who Tairasai, Magen Aleinu, all of these great Gedolim Mekubalim should be Magen Ba'adenu for all of us, for our Mishpachos, and should elevate our Neshamas to greater Aliyah, B'Torah of Yer Shamayim, Ad B'Yas Gal Tzedek, Her V'Yameinu, Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.